Oh, well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us to our third in the series of Let's Talk Innovation with the Knowledge Transfer Network and the DTG. I'm absolutely delighted to be welcoming Dr. Mariana Lopez, who is a senior lecturer in sound production and post-production at York University. Mariana, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and have a chat with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, well, welcome. And so I suppose I just wanted to kind of start at the very beginning at this session, really, and to talk to you about what originally captured your interest in sound when you were first starting out, I suppose, specifically around when you were doing your BA, and then also kind of what's kept that interest from kind of, you know, from your initial studies right through to where you are now.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I did a BA in arts with specialization in music, so mostly focusing on music through history, analysis, things like sociology of music, anthropology of music. And what drew me to that was the fact that there was always loads of music at home. There was always, my dad especially, but also my mum, they would play loads of music. There was like a huge collection of classical music, but as well, every Beatles album out there. You know, we've listened to music in the car, in journeys, and my dad played the guitar, my brother played the guitar as well, and I took piano lessons since I was young. So when I had to choose a university degree, it felt it was an opportunity to finally study something I was passionate about. I didn't like school. I was a very good student at school, but I didn't really like it. And having the opportunity of studying something I was passionate about was something that drew me to my degree, which I enjoyed a lot, because like we hope every undergraduate degree does, it really opened up my mind to thinking about music and sound in ways that I had never thought about before. And what has kept my interest alive really in sound is that it's such a vast field, and there's so many ways in which you can work with sounds, and things you can specialize in. So that I think is what has kept me going, is discovering new ways of working with sound.
Yeah, and actually you've kind of touched on this and kind of leads really neatly into my next question, which is you kind of focus specifically on accessibility and heritage. So what is it about these two areas related to music and sound that's kind of driven your work and your interest in those particular areas? Yeah. And how did that come about, I suppose, as well, like focusing on those two areas?
Yeah, and it's quite interesting because people see them as very different fields. Because when I work on heritage, I don't necessarily work on accessibility for heritage. And when I work on accessibility, I specialize mostly in film and TV. But I guess what drew me to both these fields is that, to me, they're much more than just sound. And to me, that's a really, really important thing of every project I work with. So when I work with projects on accessibility, to me, it's not really about the technology, but is how technology can actually change the world and how it can change society. And I tend to very much like working on projects that have an angle of social justice to it. Yeah. That is really incredibly important to me. So to me, accessibility, when I work on sound for accessibility, to me, really, it's about equality. It's about inclusivity. It's making sure everybody has access to the same thing. And it's about diversifying content and access. And when I work with heritage, in a way, in a completely, what might seem like a completely different angle, but I see them a bit as linked, is I actually specialize in the acoustics of spaces that are generally not considered to be important because they haven't necessarily resulted in great structures. So most of my work has been on outdoors drama performances. And when we think about acoustics, we generally think about beautiful buildings, generally large, or concert halls. And I decided to actually work with outdoor spaces to try to kind of demonstrate that our medieval ancestors knew more about the changes that acoustics produce on sound than we think about. So I was very irritated as a student as to everything pre-17th century. When we talked about acoustics, about pre-17th century drama, it was always either Greek and Roman, or then we see a big jump to Elizabethan theatre. And I was like, well, surely there was quite a few years between that. And when people think about medieval acoustics, they think about religious spaces, churches, monasteries, cathedrals. And I just wanted to look about more the mix of performance with everyday experience through outdoors acoustics. So I guess a short answer to that is looking at topics in a different way and trying to look at the world in a different way might be a way of saying that.
Yeah, because well, that's so interesting. And how have you seen that technology change? Going back to your first point around accessibility, how has that changed during the course of your career? And how, I'm hoping that the answer is going to be that things have changed and that we are more accessible and things aren't. But actually, yeah, I know, and that's what I was fearing that might be the reaction. But so I suppose the first question is, have things changed? And then if not, where have we got to go to next? What's going to be the drivers for change moving forwards?
In terms of accessibility, I have to say I don't think things have changed too much.
No, okay.
But that's my point of view. I think,
yeah.
I mean, and my specialization, I should say, is about accessibility for visually impaired audiences to film and television. So this might well be different in other fields. But I think the way we think about providing access through audio description has not changed much in terms of what reaches end users.
Yeah.
So this idea of a third person commentary as the best way of doing something is still a predominant way of looking at the field. And this idea that we can just provide one version of accessibility and that everyone will be happy with it, I think it's unusual and something that we should work on. I think I'm a believer that we should consider private personal preferences, aesthetic preferences, needs, expectations of audiences when we create accessibility formats. And that to me means providing more than one version of accessibility. So someone might be really happy with audio description, they might love it, but someone might want something a little bit different, like what we work on the Enhancing Audio Description project, where we use sound design and audio spatialization to provide accessible experiences. And if we provide different versions of things, then we can allow the user to really access what works best for them. And I think the field still has a lot to work on that. I mean, there's been some really great innovation, but I think there's still loads and loads to be done so that it can actually reach the end user. There has been more innovation, I think, in the fields of theatre, for example, in terms of accessibility, but I think we can be much better in film and TV providing diverse accessibility experiences. Yeah,
and I imagine that was going to be the answer. I think I was just hoping that it might not have been, but it's really, but
I hope.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't think that we think enough about sound and the accessibility and what that means. And as you say, there's still, somebody is saying in the chat, well said, Mariana. Yeah, absolutely, it is well said, and there is a huge amount to still be done. So I really hope that we can start to kind of make those changes.
Yeah, and I think collaborations between academics, practitioners, and the industry is the key, really, to start changing. And hopefully, the future will have more diversity within accessibility.
Yeah, well, we will come on to that a bit again. But one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about was your Cathedral Acoustics project. So, I suppose it's going on to your heritage side of your work. But so, what has this project involved? I know you're a supervisor on the project, but so can you tell us a little bit about it and what it has involved?
Yes, of course. And this was a project that finished in October, I think. Pandemic timings got me confused. It was a 2-year project funded by the European Commission, and it was a Marie Skłodowska-Curie Fellowship. The investigator was the amazing Dr. Lydia Alvarez Morales. Is a very excellent colleague and a very, very good friend of mine. And I should clarify, this was her project. My role was as supervisor for the host institution. So for those that are new to these fellowships, they are about sharing experiences and combining expertise and around Europe. So great opportunities to work with experts on a project. And Lydia's project was all about studying the acoustics of cathedrals in the UK. And the project focused on 4 venues. I'm probably going to forget them now. It was York, of course, because that's quite convenient. It was Ripon, Ely, and Bristol. So what we did is travel around when you were able to travel to places. So we just finished right in time, actually. We traveled to the cathedrals to capture the acoustics of the environments as they are now. So we did loads of acoustic measurements there. And then we use those acoustic measurements to understand how the acoustics of the space operate now, but also as a basis to build computer models that then allow you to change the acoustics so that they try to recreate the historical acoustics. So if you want to hear how the space might have sounded in the 15th century when there was a different architectural configuration, then you could do that. And the spaces were chosen because they represent different floor plans and different characteristics. And it was a real huge pleasure to work with Lydia on this wonderful project of hers. So definitely do check it out. This is just a summary, but it's really, really interesting project.
Yeah, and I know that the DTG have been putting into the chat box some of the links to your project. So so please do go and check those out. And actually, if anybody online has got any questions for Mariana, please do pop them in the chat box or the Q&A box, and I will get through them with Mariana over the next 20 minutes or so. So what was the hope for the outcomes of that Cathedral Acoustics project, and how does that relate to your work going forward, or the kind of the work of the industry going forward? Is it because I think sometimes we think, obviously lots of great research projects happen, so it's then just what are the tangible outcomes of that?
Well, Cathedral Acoustics was really about furthering our understanding of intangible heritage. So there's still quite a tendency of thinking about heritage as things that we see. But here it's about what about the heritage that we hear, and that in a way we can only really hope to arrive at approximations through the combination of digital technology and also a lot of historical work, as well as an appreciation that we don't hear the same as our ancestors did. So what we do is try to build recreations that help us understand what those experiences were. So this was really about furthering heritage work. But right now, considering our limitations for travel, these are wonderfully important projects, because you may want to create the sense of someone visiting the space, even if they cannot be there. And this experience is for heritage sites that many times depend on sales of tickets, etc., entrances to maintain their structures. Being able to provide something online can become very, very powerful. And also thinking about buildings through their acoustics means they can help other researchers rethink their own work based on a sonic aspect. Yeah,
amazing. It sounds like an incredible project. So please, I've checked it out a little bit, so I must go a little bit further into it. It just sounds amazing. And you're involved in another project, aren't you, as well, the Acoustic Atlas project. Would you tell us a little bit about this one as well, and what you're hoping to achieve through this particular project?
Yes, it's another great project, and I've been very lucky to work with such amazing, talented acousticians throughout the years. And this is, again, this is funding from the European Commission. So thank you, European Commission. And this is, again, this is a project that is, I supervise, but the researcher is Dr. Kobe van Tonder. And this is also a piece about acoustics, but in this case, we're not looking at the acoustics of the built environment. We're actually looking at the acoustics and heritage of natural environments. And this is a really, really novel aspect of the work, because again, once more, as I said before, we tend to think about acoustics worth preserving as the ones that, you know, have magnificent buildings attached to them, but there's a lot of value in the preservation of natural spaces. And Kobe is doing some fantastic work, and we're going to be working on caves in the Yorkshire Dales once we're able to go to the caves in the Yorkshire Dales. Amazing. And there's going to be a capturing of the acoustics of those spaces. This is very important in terms of any way in which the acoustics might actually be affected by climate change. So there's a very interesting angle on preservation of natural spaces because of changes due to climate change. But also COVI is doing some wonderful work thinking about how those acoustic measurements can be used creatively. So how can those applied to newly composed material? And COVI is a wonderful sonic artist, a wonderful composer. So we're hoping to create some wonderful sonic pieces that use that material creatively. So a really interesting project.
Oh, amazing. And what's the time frame for the project? So you're kind of starting that at the moment, and
so we started, I believe, in September 2020. I call this the long 2020. So we started September 2020, and it's a 2-year project. So we're in the earlier stages, so to speak.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Well, I look forward to hearing the outcomes of that. I don't think I've necessarily thought about sound within that kind of natural environment, and particularly the preservation point of view. I don't think I've thought about that, but as you say, it's really important. Melissa's just put in the chat box a really great question, which is why don't we hear the same as our ancestors? Is it environmental or neurological development? That's a brilliant question. Thanks, Melissa.
It's actually cultural, is socio-cultural. Our personal experiences as individuals, but also as part of a society within a specific culture, means that the way we interpret sounds and the values and meanings we assign to them are actually different. And this is something that's really important for people working, I believe, for people working in acoustical heritage to be very constantly aware of, is that we can never hear as our ancestors did. And the hearing mechanisms, of course, would have been the same, but what church bells meant for a medieval person in York, it doesn't have the same meaning to me. And I think understanding sounds contextually is really, really important to be able to interpret the results we derive from technology. So technology can be very powerful, but if we don't use it with caution, we could end up, telling people, well, yes, this is what medieval times sounded like. And actually, it's really what I think medieval times sounded like. So that constant awareness of premises linked to what we call sensory history and time specificity and cultural specificity of the senses is really, really important.
God, that
answers the question.
Yeah, God, that's fascinating. And then just to think about our own cultural references for now, and what others in the future will then think about our own cultural references for now. Yeah, that's just really interesting. Yeah, and Melissa says, absolutely fascinating. Thank you. So it's really fascinating. So what I'm really interested in also, Mariana, is how do you choose your research projects? So you've obviously got these kind of two interests, but how do you decide what you'd like to research next, particularly going back to, I suppose, accessibility, when there is so much more work to be done? And what are the drivers for you when you're deciding about your next research project? And what are the indicators that you kind of are in place for you to kind of decide where you're going to go next?
Yeah, I know this sounds a bit maybe obvious to many people. I always choose things that I feel passionate about and I feel, strongly about. I think that doing a project that you don't have any strong feelings about could end up being unmotivated by week 2. And I always tell my students, I'm not saying everybody should do this, but they should choose projects about topics that make them angry. So if something makes you angry, that means that you probably want to find a solution to the problem. Once I had a student that was very concerned when they said nothing made them angry, and they now no longer knew what to choose for their research. So this is not the only way you can choose a project. But to me, I generally go for projects where I think, actually, this is a problem. And I think we could do better. And that's how I personally choose my project. So it's a mix of passion, but also a sense that you could do better and you could provide a better version of things and a better even account of history through new research. That doesn't mean I'm angry all the time. Just sometimes.
Well, as you say, it kind of, at least it does provide you with that driver, doesn't it? And a passion that absolutely. I totally get that. So what makes a really good research team, Mariana? And how do you choose the collaborators? So once you've got that passion project, you're like, right, we need to focus on this. How do you then choose the partners that you're going to work with, and what makes a good research team?
Again, this might sound very evident. I tend to choose people that I like. And I think it's really, really important with research teams. You're going to spend a lot of time working together, and maybe even traveling and doing field trips and discussing things. And I think compatibility is really, really important. And that doesn't mean you have to agree on everything. Actually, you can gain a lot from disagreeing. But I think, to me, there has to be, people have to be compatible. And I have generally worked with people I have known in some way or other from other projects, maybe because I met them at the event and at an event, and we really got on, and we thought, oh, that would be great to do something together. Or I had worked with them in the past and I really enjoyed the experience. And I also like working with people that have a different skill set to mine. I try to work not with people that have the same sort of training that I do. I think there's more to be gained from working with people that are really different in the sort of expertise they bring. And a good example is we did a project, this finished a couple of years ago, called The Soundscapes of the York Mystery Plays. That was a heritage project that was funded by the British Academy. And for that project, I worked with Dr. Marcus Hardin, that is a specialist in programming and web development. And I worked with Oswin Wan, that is a wonderful graphic designer that I had met when he was a master's student. And what I loved about that project is that we were all coming at different angles. And just when we were brainstorming things, it was just such a wonderful positive energy of, I would tell Oswin, well, this is what I'd like. And the next day he would just come with this wonderful visualization. I was like, oh my God, that's just fantastic. And I think there's a lot of energy to be gained from that work.
Yeah, I think that's true, and it's really great to hear you talk so passionately about your collaborators. Marianne, we've had another question come in from Richard, who says the DTG State of the Nation research found that a third of UK consumers struggle to hear TV, audio, or dialogue. Could the application of your research findings help us reduce this figure?
That is a good question, but I don't actually work on hearing impairments. So I'm not the best person to answer this question. But I would instead encourage you to look at the work by Dr. Lauren Ward, that is currently working at the University of York. And her specialization is actually on that, is looking for strategies in which we can use object-based broadcasting to make audio more intelligible. But I'm going to be honest, she'd know more about this. Again, my expertise is providing access through sound design to visually impaired audiences. But definitely check out her work. She's been doing some really fascinating things. Yeah,
awesome. Thank you. So how does your academic research, once you've got this research, how does it then kind of filter into and translate into the film and TV industry? What does that relationship look like between academic research and what is happening in the industry? I think sometimes we think never the twain shall meet, but actually I know from my experience at the KTN that that's totally not true. And often researchers and industry are completely integrated and work so collaboratively together. But what does that process look like for you in terms of getting your research into and applied within the industry?
Yeah, this is particularly relevant to work on accessibility. I mean, I'm a believer that if accessibility work doesn't reach the end user, then it's a bit problematic. And sometimes you need to do, background work to be able to get to that stage. For enhancing audio description that was funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, we actually had a project advisory panel that had different industry representatives. So when we presented our ideas, we discussed them with them thoroughly, got their thoughts, and incorporated those to our design plans. And that could be from, talking with a dubbing mixer and thinking, okay, how are we going to provide this accessibility, this accessible audio to be compatible with your workflows, to talking to ITV and seeing how we can work on their broadcasting pipelines. And as well, of course, here we need to think about end users as well, so representatives of the end users, and that could be from working with charities like RNIB to actually working with individuals through focus groups, interviews, making sure everything you produce and that hopefully eventually is broadcast or goes into the cinema actually is something that end users would benefit from. But I completely agree with you. I think for this sort of projects, there needs to be an industry collaboration for them to work.
Yeah, no, totally. we've only got half an hour for this session, goodness, and we've whizzed through. We've got a few more minutes left. But one of the questions I was going to ask is what are the exciting developments within the sound field at the moment? Where do you think some of the innovations are going to happen as we move? I mean, I think technology has changed rapidly, hasn't it, in the last year? But where specifically do you think that innovation is going to happen as we move forwards in 2021 and beyond?
I particularly like, or I think there's a lot of potential in object-based mixing, like Dolby Atmos, but also object-based broadcasting. So this idea that you assemble an experience at the end user stage. And I think for accessibility, that has a lot of potential because it allows people to personalize their experiences, but also it has a lot of creative applications. So I definitely think that's going to be a big thing. And hopefully we will see a greater implementation, but also a greater integration to university degrees and others, because if we don't teach people how to use new technology, no one's going to use it because nobody knows how to use it. And I think we're definitely not at that stage of being able to do that. There's been a lot of novel work with binaural audio, although binaural audio is by no means new. It's been around for a lot of time. It's just had a bit of a revival in the last few years. But I guess what I would say is that more than thinking about just the technology, it's about thinking what we do with that technology. If technology turns into a gimmick, but there is no story, no content, no benefit.
The impact. It's all about the impact.
It just ends up being very short-lived. And, it's like 3D cinema. Then a few months later, a year later, nobody actually wants to watch a 3D film. So I think what I would encourage people in general is thinking, well, what stories are you going to tell with that technology? What change are you going to do? What does this contribute to the world and society? I think that's an even more important question in a way.
Yeah, totally. Couldn't agree more with that. And we've got another question in for you. So how do you think we can persuade the TV industry to place accessibility for vision and sound at the start of production rather than at the end?
I think it's about networking. I actually have had loads of positive connections with the industry. So I'm a bit surprised when I do presentations about our project, and they seem to be skeptical because we've had loads of really, really interesting conversations with industry. And I think there's a lot of broadcasters and a lot of producers and directors that actually are quite open to thinking about changing the workflows. And I think, again, it's about networking. It's sometimes about finding compromises. So things have to be integrated to workflows that are existing. So I don't think we can expect producers, directors, etc., to change all their creative processes and technical processes, because that actually is very costly, but also, again, it requires such a lot of training that it might not be possible. So I think it's about working with people to find the best avenues forward to integration. But I have to say my experience has been really positive as getting loads of interest in moving the field forward and collaboration. So I think it's just about building networks and working together, really.
Yeah, well, that's really, really great to hear that you're getting such positive reactions. That's brilliant. So just, I suppose, one final question for you is, I suppose, what is inspiring you at the moment? What are going to be your big projects for 2021? What are you hoping to, because I imagine when you're a researcher, there could be so many different projects that you could take forward. So what is going to be your main focus for this year in particular?
Well, it really depends on what happens in the next few months. But of course, there's already some ongoing projects that I hope will continue to progress, and a lot with this project, it takes some time to get them disseminated so that they have that impact we so much talk about. So I think continue working on dissemination and perfecting techniques. It's a really, really important part of every project. Even after they've finished, I'm always committed to continue working on them for my own satisfaction, but also because of going back to that sense that they are important to society and hopefully makes a big contribution to the fields, one would hope. It's important to continue going. So So we'll see.
Yeah, well, totally. And it's obviously COVID has thrown us all over the last year. So I imagine, and that's probably just the same for all researchers and the work that you've been doing. So I'm sure it'd be good to kind of get things back on track for you and the projects that you're working on. Well, look, Mariana, that has been a really fascinating 30 minutes. It's totally whizzed by. So thank you so much for joining us today on behalf of the KTN and the DTG. We really appreciate you taking the time. Good luck with all the projects that you're working on. If there is anybody here on the webinar that would like to reach out to Mariana and her colleagues at York, who I'm sure would be interested in working with you and collaborating with you on projects, so please do reach out to them. And thank you again, Mariana, lovely to see you. And thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate it. Thanks so much now. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.